Garrett Webb, and for my senior project, I did the Battle of Pelusium, focusing on Egyptians' love for cats. Okay, so the motivation behind the Battle of Pelusium was recorded by a Greek historian, Herodotus. Right here we have Cambyses II, and that's Amias II. Cambyses was the king of Persia, or the pharaoh of Persia, and Amias was the pharaoh of Egypt. And Herodotus records two separate stories. One is according to the Persians, and one is according to the Egyptians. The one pertaining to the Persians was that Cambyses asked for the hand of Amias' daughter, but he didn't want to offend Cambyses, but he also didn't want to give up his daughter, so he sent his predecessor's daughter, Naetes, who ended up telling that she wasn't the actual offspring of Amias, so Cambyses got mad and insulted, so he chose to invade. But the Egyptians tell it that Cambyses' father had always preferred Egyptian women, and so Cambyses vowed to his mother that he would turn Egypt upside down. But either way, Cambyses chose to invade Egypt in May of 522. Sometime before the actual invasion, Amias died, and the Greeks pulled out their alliance with the Egyptians. So it left the war to be fought by Amias' son, Psammetichus, and solely the Egyptian army. And surprisingly, Psammetichus and the Egyptian army were holding them back. They were doing fairly well. So Cambyses changed his tactics. He knew how much the Egyptians had love for cats and all animals, but specifically cats, and their goddess Bastet. So they lined the front lines with animals, as you can see, and their shields, and then they painted the photo of painted pictures of Bastet all over themselves and all of their shields to kind of spook them. And the Egyptian soldiers were unable to harm the animals, and they were taunted by the face of their loved goddess. So they tried to run, but instead were slaughtered on the battlefield. And it's rumored that Cambyses threw cats in the face of the Egyptians after they were dead and make fun of them. So why was Bastet and cats so popular? The popularity of cats actually comes from the goddess Bastet. She was the most well-known and loved goddess in Egypt. She evolved from an early lion-headed goddess, Sekhmet, but during the late period when cats were first domesticated, Sekhmet became one with Bast. Bast was the goddess of home, fertility, women's secrets, childbirth, and she was believed to be the protector from all evil spirits and disease in women and children. She was worshipped as a beautiful woman with the head of a cat, as you can see there. And her cult center was in Bubastis. As you can see, Bubastis is located right here. That's the Temple of Bast, and that's a cat cemetery. So Bubastis became one of the most rich cities in Egypt because how many people would go and visit it to go to the Temple of Bast, and also there were Bast cat cemeteries. So people would go to bury their cats. And Herodotus claimed that Bastet's temple was not the most expensive or the biggest, but that it was the most beautiful. And the festival in honor of Bast began with a march down the Nile River, and the feast would take place, and afterwards everyone would drink and exchange, and that's what became so rich. And while Bastet's mass popularity pushed Egyptians to have more household cats, they were domesticated and used differently in earlier times. Early Egyptians observed that cats often hunted rats, birds, scorpions, mice, snakes, and so they chose to domesticate them. And later, they were first, it takes about a millennium to domesticate them, so it was believed that they were domesticated between the Old and Middle Kingdoms, and they kind of evolved from being rodent control to being royal pets. So during the 18th dynasty, cats were often painted in royal photos, and they were, as you can see, started being mummified very well, especially for Egyptians in power. And during the late period, which was the peak of bass popularity, was when cats really became household animals. Visitors of Egypt during this time began to document the abundance of cats in Egypt, and Herodotus wrote that during any natural disaster, people would often save their cats, or they would save themselves, and they would also shave off their eyebrows in honor of mourning when their cats would die. And cat cemeteries were introduced also in this time, mostly in Memphis and Bubastis. But perhaps the most compelling evidence that shows how much I really loved cats was the penalty for killing cats was actually death. So you'd be hung if you killed a cat. And for my primary research, I interviewed longtime teacher Mr. Ralph Jones. And the first observation he had about Egyptians was that they had a deep veneration for all things in life that had any kind of that was related in helping anyone live on this earth. A quote from him is, "From what we know, the ancient Egyptians had a deep veneration for all kinds of life. Like most African tribes, when they killed an animal, they would say a prayer thanking the spirit of that animal for helping it feed themselves and their families. This was part of a symbiotic relationship. They viewed all life as interconnected, believing that there was no real difference in any forms of life. But cats had special properties, which explains why they were mummified, because mummification is the cornerstone for all Egyptian death. It's how you prepare for your next life. So, what did I learn, and why did the Egyptians ultimately surrender their land for animals? Many try to take deeper meaning into the battle, but the answer is very simple. Egyptians saw the animals in the same light that they saw themselves, their families, and their friends. And they placed the paintings of Bastet and their goddess with the same respect that Christians place the Bible and Muslims place the Quran. So the Egyptians, it was very simple for them. It would be like killing their own if they were to kill them on the battlefield. And how did Egyptians contribute to our modern society? They actually did more than we know. As Mr. Jones stated earlier, the morals of Egyptians used regarding animals is seen in classic and modern Buddhism. So Buddhists don't kill or eat animals generally, or if they do, they thank them. And also it had a great influence on our contemporary household cats. So there are a few cultures that have began domesticating cats and dogs, but none as prevalent as Egyptians. So based on paintings, cat mummifications, zoologists have found that modern day cats are very much like ancient Egyptian cats. So here you can see that's an ancient Egyptian cat. They have longer necks, longer tails, and longer legs. But that's a modern day tabby, and they don't look much differently. But when people started discovering the West, they would take cats over and breed them with our native cats. That's why we have different breeds. Here am I, we're excited. And if you have any questions, you can ask.
What inspired you to do this research?
Well, I really love cats a lot. And for many cat lovers, we know that Egyptians were the first domestic cats and the most prevalent, so I thought it would be something that interests me and something I like.
My grandma said that cats are evil, is that true?
No. That was actually brought when the Christians started persecuting witches and hanging them in Salem. Cats were often their pets, so that's where the evil thing comes from. These Christians associated cats with witches, but that's not anything. Cats are sweet.
Are there ancient dogs?
No, I don't know. I'll get back to you on that one.
What was your favorite thing that you found out when doing research?
That they shave their eyebrows in the morning, cats. I think that's a lot of dedication for a cat.
Is there any specific symbolism in shaving the eyebrows, or is it just to make it very clear?
Just to make it very clear, because you do, back in, you had to show, like, they, people wore black for morning, they just shaved their